This is Crappy to Happy, and I am your host, Cass Dunn. I'm a clinical and coaching psychologist and mindfulness meditation teacher, and of course, author of the Crappy to Happy books. In this show, I bring you conversations with interesting, inspiring, intelligent people who are experts in their field and who have something of value to share that will help you feel less crappy and more happy. Hello and welcome to another solo episode of Crappy to Happy. I did an episode recently, you guys, about self-sabotage and the idea of competing commitments or conflicting values and how you can be committed to your goal or committed to achieving something in your life and at the same time be equally committed at maybe a more of an unconscious level to something that is in direct conflict with that. So you might be equally committed to not having any stress in your life or to not outshining somebody else in your life. And this can cause you to have problems and get really frustrated when you try to achieve what you want in life. And I wanted to talk about another concept that is really similar to that, but with a slightly different twist, just in case this helps it land in a different way for some people. I had some really positive feedback on that episode. It really resonated with a lot of people. And just recently, I was drawn to go back to a book that I had been reading or listening to on Audible or something many years ago. And it struck me that this is really relevant to this idea and that it is still just as relevant today as it was then. The book is called The Big Leap by a guy called Gay Hendricks, who is a psychologist. And it is also about this idea of self-sabotage and the unconscious blocks or barriers that get in our way. And the way he explains it is kind of interesting and unique. And it occurred to me as I was listening to this book, which, like I said, I listened to it years ago and I thought, oh yeah, that's interesting. And I'd sort of forgotten about it. And I don't know why somebody mentioned it recently and I revisited it and I thought, wow, this is still really relevant. And in fact, there's stuff in this book that he was kind of ahead of his time because he talks, I was like, I'll get to this in a minute, but he kind of talks a lot about creating a greater degree of tolerance or a greater degree of comfort with what feels uncomfortable as a way to expand your capacity to grow, to reach further than you might otherwise. And he's really talking a lot about nervous system regulation. And he's really talking a lot about somatic kind of work. But at the time, when I was first listening to this book, I wouldn't have been aware of that because that wasn't something that I was really familiar with. So having said that, I thought, wow, this guy it's worth a mention. He's worth a mention on the show in case you might be interested in his work. So let me just break down for you what his theory is and what the premise is of his book, which is called The Big Leap. And fundamentally, what he talks about is how we each have what he calls an upper limit problem. Isn't that just the most perfect expression? An upper limit problem. So if you find yourself self-sabotaging every time you get close to achieving a goal or hitting an edge all of the time and never being able to push past it, whether it's with your career or your finances or your weight or your relationships or health or fitness, whatever it is, if you find yourself constantly butting up against this edge and never being able to push through it, he calls this an upper limit problem. Like you have a thermostat which is set intrinsically, like in your unconscious, and you will do whatever it takes to not exceed that threshold. Like if you go over it, it's like, when a thermostat is set to a certain temperature and if it gets too hot, it will naturally come back down. If it gets too cold, it will naturally come back up. That's what he says. He says you've got your own thermostat for success, basically for success, for love, for happiness, for wealth, for money. And if you exceed it, you will unconsciously start to self-sabotage or create problems to bring yourself back down to that level. And I think it's really true. So let me talk you through this in a bit more detail. And then if you are interested, you can have a look at his book. It's called The Big Leap, like I said. His name is Gay Hendricks. So essentially, he says that the upper limit problem refers to self-imposed limitations that prevent individuals from achieving greater success, happiness, fulfillment. Like I said, it's like the capacity for how much happiness you can hold or how much fulfillment or how much success, how much wealth, what feels comfortable and how do we learn to expand that capacity if you find yourself self-sabotaging? And he really boils down this to 4 kind of core beliefs. You remember last time when I talked about this, I talked about core beliefs that you have, which aren't necessarily in your conscious awareness, but you'll see them playing out in your behavior. And one is the belief that you are fundamentally flawed or unworthy. Like, this is that kind of core belief of unworthiness or undeservingness, that you are just not deserving of the kind of success or happiness that other people are capable of, like that's somewhere wired into you. And of course, this all goes back to early childhood experiences, attachment, which I've talked about before. Another barrier he refers to is this idea of disloyalty and abandonment, like this idea that if you are too successful, if you are doing too well in life, if you're too happy, then that could be seen as a betrayal by people in your inner circle, and that in order to stay connected and belonging, you will self-sabotage so that you don't risk rejection by the important people in your life. That's really interesting. That really speaks to this idea of like tribal shame, which I have heard Liz Gilbert talk about before. And it's not her expression. She got it from somewhere else. So I don't know what the origin of it is. But she talks a lot about this idea of tribal shame, about what we will do to keep ourselves small if that is what is kind of culturally or socially acceptable in the community from which we came and from which and where we belong. Like in your particular community, in your family, in the area that you grew up, like there's this kind of unspoken limit. And if you go outside of that, if you get too successful, if you move too far away from the norm, then people will reject you. People will see you as being getting ahead of yourself or getting too big for your boots or whatever it is. And so because belonging is one of our very primal core needs, then if there is any part of you that feels like you are going to risk rejection, then you will keep yourself small. So that's interesting. And again, if you look at that through the lens of competing commitments, which is the other episode that I did, it's this, I'm committed to doing really well in my life, but there's this other part of me that's really committed to not outshining, not outgrowing my tribe. It's interesting stuff, right? It takes a little bit of deep work and self-reflection. Another one he says is believing that your success will be a burden. So that's this avoiding overwhelm or too much responsibility or too much stress. If there is a core belief that success is going to come with at a cost, then you will avoid it. And this other one, which is sort of similar to that disloyalty one, is this fear of outshining others, like maybe being committed to not evoking jealousy or competitiveness in other people, not wanting to make other people uncomfortable with your success. And that could go to family messages, feedback that you got when you're a kid at school, feedback that you got from your family. You see how all of these core beliefs and kind of rules we create for ourselves, they can be so out of our conscious awareness until we start to really tap in and examine them. But what I really like and what really struck me when I was revisiting this work, because I know that everything I've said so far is probably very similar to what I've said to you before, he said, look for when you start to create problems in your life, when things are going really well. Maybe things are going really well at work, but then you start having problems in your relationship. Or maybe things are going really well in your relationship and then you start to blow through all of your cash. Like there'll be one area of your life when things are going really well and you're feeling really happy and really fulfilled. And maybe unconsciously you create a problem in another area of your life in order to bring yourself back to that level of dissatisfaction and struggle and frustration that feels more comfortable to you, that feels more like the norm for you, what is kind of predictable and known for you, and what feels safe in its predictability, not necessarily comfortable, but safe because it's familiar, is a feeling of struggle, a feeling of dissatisfaction, a feeling of, just things not being quite right, of needing to really struggle and work hard. It's like this thermostat is wired for discomfort or struggle or feeling, frustrated or not good enough. And how it might be that the sabotage happens in a different area of your life. So that's kind of interesting, isn't it? And then he also talks about how, and this is the bit that struck me, I thought, wow, dude, you are so far ahead of your time, because this book was published in 2009. So maybe it was just ahead of my time. Maybe I wasn't familiar with this idea of nervous system regulation and somatic work back then, which I wasn't. But you know what? Most people weren't back then. Not to the degree that everybody kind of is talking about this now. But he talks about pay attention to where maybe things are going really well, and then you start worrying about something. Then you start creating a problem in your mind, or you start focusing and fixating on some kind of worry about something that doesn't exist. You're just making up stuff in your head to cause you to feel concerned. And there's this really unproductive kind of worry, and he does talk about different kinds of worry. Like if you can do something about it, if it's a problem that you can resolve and you can fix and it's real, then that's one thing. But this worrying about things that you have no control over or that haven't happened, like things that you're making up, really unproductive worry. And it's just like a strategy for keeping you feeling dissatisfied, basically. So he says, look for when things are going well, you're feeling happy or positive or looking forward to something or feeling really satisfied, and then you suddenly start to create a problem in your mind. And he says, the next thing you need to do, this is his approach for dealing with this, the next thing to do is to turn your attention, basically let go of the worry, turn your attention to something that feels really good, something that really makes you happy, that makes you feel positive or grateful. Maybe it's thinking about a person that you're really connected to, just something that you feel really grateful for in life, like turning your attention to something really positive. And he says, let that seep through your whole being. Allow yourself to soak in those feelings of pleasure and satisfaction and gratitude and abundance. And basically, it's somatic work, right? It's like expand your capacity for happiness, expand your capacity for feeling good. Feel it in every cell of your body. Just allow it to allow yourself to kind of marinate in this sense of abundance and gratitude, which is so interesting because that is really similar to what Rick Hanson talks about in his book, Hardwiring Happiness, which I'm pretty sure came out way later than this Gay Hendricks book. In fact, I'm going to Google that right now. Hardwiring Happiness by Rick Hanson. Hardwiring Happiness came out in 2013, so a little bit later than Gay Hendricks and his upper limit problems. But anyway, he's really talking about expanding your capacity and feeling in your body the sensation of happiness and fulfillment and pleasure. And then he says, just watch what happens. Just watch how positive things start to happen in your life and how you are more equipped to handle that and manage that, because you are essentially like getting your nervous system comfortable with feeling good. Because otherwise it's your nervous system that's wired to default to self-sabotage because that doesn't feeling good and being too successful or getting too far ahead of yourself, that feels unsafe, not in your conscious mind, but somewhere in your body, like somewhere in your nervous system, in your unconscious, that feels unsafe. And so then you shut that down. So he's really talking about training yourself to expand your capacity to feel good, which I just think was really, like I said, kind of ahead of its time, because that's what we're all teaching everybody to do now. Then he talks about, just in terms of some other tools and some strategies, if you know within yourself that you have this upper limit problem, that you create problems as soon as things start to go really well, frustrating as that is. So he says, obviously, self-awareness is key, being mindful, being really mindful, really observant and remember, mindfulness is being curious, being present, and observing without judgment. So it doesn't come with a lot of self-criticism and self-judgment. It's just being really aware of witnessing what is happening as it's happening. So paying attention to moments of sudden discomfort, or noticing when you're starting to worry unnecessarily, noticing when you're starting to, feel anxious as soon as you start to feel happy, like starting to wait for the other shoe to drop, that kind of thing, which is quite common actually. He says, just be aware of when it might be a sign that you are hitting up against your upper limit. Then he says, really reflect on your life and have a look at if there is any patterns of self-sabotage. Are there ways that you typically get in your own way? Like, what are they? Have there been a pattern of you creating obstacles or creating setbacks, manufacturing problems, or just doing wild stuff to sabotage yourself when things are going well? When I talk about unconscious self-sabotage, I mean things like, you've got a really big job interview, you're really excited about it, a friend comes to town and says, let's catch up, and then you have absolutely no intention, like you need to get an early night, but then what do you know? You start having a good time catching up with your friend, one thing leads to another, and you drink way too much and you stay out way too late and you end up waking up with the most shocking hangover and you've got to go to this job interview. It's like you had no intention of doing that, but somehow that happened. It could be that you're on your way to the job interview and you get lost or you lose your car keys. Things like this that don't seem obvious, they seem completely unintentional, but sometimes it's actually kind of an unconscious self-sabotage. We kind of unconsciously do these things to get in our own way because something else is going on. And then he talks about obviously things like, changing your mindset, reframing your thoughts. I've talked about this before. I think, yes, it can be helpful. Obviously, you've got to challenge your limiting beliefs and unhelpful thinking patterns and reframe negative thoughts into something a bit more positive. But again, that's quite surface level. Like, yes, that's helpful. But I think all of this other stuff about expanding your capacity for feeling good and for training yourself to feel more comfortable with feeling good, training yourself to receive compliments, to receive positive feedback instead of brushing that away. Like these are all things that you can do which help you to, it's kind of expanding the container of yourself and your nervous system and your energy system, I guess, expanding what you can comfortably hold in terms of praise and positive feedback and gratitude and being able to sit and hold that comfortably. Because if you're not good at receiving, then you will undermine your own success. You will bat away anything good and positive that comes to you in your life. Celebrating even the smallest successes, little wins, milestones, like making a point, using mindfulness to be really present and then making a point to really celebrate those small wins. Again, like noticing, acknowledging, feeling it in your body, expanding your capacity to feel good, to getting more comfortable with receiving, enjoying abundance, gratitude, success, happiness, fulfillment, getting that to feel safe. It's like raising your thermostat, raising the thermostat of what feels normal to you instead of always unconsciously dropping yourself back down to this lower level of struggle and dissatisfaction and frustration, because that's what you've been conditioned is like that's your baseline. You want to kind of raise your baseline by practicing feeling good, basically. And like I said before, just things like that gratitude practice, abundance practice, like really turning your attention to what feels good, turning your attention to what is going well, really intentionally. And like I said, there is science to this. Rick Hanson wrote a book called Hardwiring Happiness, and he's a neuroscientist, and he talks about how you can rewire your brain to feel happier more of the time because of neuroplasticity. So it's like this intentional savoring positive experiences, intentionally savoring that feeling of abundance and gratitude and anything that is going well in your life, putting your attention on it and not just noticing it and going, oh yeah, that's nice, I'm happy about that, but like feeling it in every cell of your body, like wiring it into your nervous system and having that become your new normal and your new benchmark. And you might think, well, that's got nothing to do with how much money you make or your relationships or what's happening in your career, but it really does. Because if you remember that this whole like self-sabotage is all about like bringing you back to the level of happiness or fulfillment that you feel comfortable with, then the more that you expand your capacity to hold fulfillment and success and happiness, then the more successful you're going to be because you're not going to be getting in your own way. Journaling is great as well. Just giving you some tips about this. I just wanted to share this because I really was, to be honest with you, it was really this idea of this nervous system regulation and this somatic work that he was referring to that nobody else was really talking about back in 2009. And I can guarantee you when I first listened to this book, which is probably about the mid, maybe 2015, probably close to 10 years ago, I probably would have read that and thought, oh yeah, whatever. Like, that sounds a bit weird to me. But knowing what I know now, like that's really relevant. That is really on point. That's good advice. So upper limit problems, if you're trying to push forward and achieve in your life, in your business, in your work, in your relationships, whatever it is, and you feel like you're pushing up against like a glass ceiling almost, then have a think about whether one of these upper limit problems might be at play and what you can do to expand your capacity for success and happiness. Hope that that is helpful to you. Just to pick up on what we were talking about last time, I did invite a friend and went out for an evening with somebody who I've only met once before. So that was lovely. And next week, I will be back with an interview. You've probably had enough of me yabbering on by myself. I will be back with some guest interviews starting from next week, and we'll be back to interchanging a guest episode with a solo episode. So I've got some really great guests lined up, some really interesting topics. As always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for everybody who has given me feedback lately that they enjoy the podcast and how much they look forward to it. You know, I have a voice note app on my website where you can send me a voice note. What I'm going to do instead is put a form where you could just go to my website. I mean, you can also just email me or DM me, but go to my website, cassdunn.com/podcast. And there is a form there where you can put in suggestions for anything that you would like me to cover, anything that you would like advice on. Obviously, I can't give personal advice, but anything that is more general advice, I am happy to do what I can. Or if there's a topic of interest to you, hit me up, let me know, and let's cover it in Crappy to Happy. So keeping it short and sweet again this week. Thank you again for being here. I cannot wait to catch you next week for another episode of Crappy to Happy.